Cabinet met yesterday, Tuesday, the 24th of March 2015, and coming out of that meeting, Dr. Roger Luncheon will bring you highlights on matters discussed at the Cabinet meeting. I'll hand you over to Dr. Luncheon.
Thank you, Kwame, and good morning again, ladies and gentlemen of the media. Apologize for that small delay in starting, particularly as I intend to disappoint you by insisting for this occasion we stick to questions and clarifications on my opening statement. Time constraints prevent otherwise. Arising from the Cabinet meeting of the 24th of March, these are the matters I'll be bringing to your attention. Contracts for which, Cabinet granted its no objections to the awards. Litigation against externally funded developmental projects. And then among Cabinet snippets, diplomatic roundup, the President Ramatarz's visit April the 9th to Jamaica, the deep water harbor in Region 6, pre-feasibility studies, electoral observer missions update, and the NIS extended data entry and verification project. As usual, colleagues, allow me to start with the contract, as I said, for which Cabinet granted its no objections to the awards. Force, Public Works, the maritime sector, contract for the emergency docking of the dredge motor vessel Stephen N. And that award, 32.6 million Guyana dollars. 32.6 million Guyana dollars. Local government, provision of dietary supplies for the dormitory facilities at the Waramadang Secondary School, Region 7, and that is at a cost of 19.5 million Guyana dollars. 19.5 for dietary supplies. And the last one, health. The procurement of vaccines. This is for the maternal child health program in the Ministry of Health. The U.S. award is $77,000 US dollars. My mathematicians have suggested that that is 16.1 million Guyana dollars. 16.1 million Guyana dollars. Those, colleagues, are the three contracts I have brought to your attention, Cabinet having granted its no objection to the awards. Litigation. Externally funded developmental projects. Guyana is a developing country, and its development agenda is significantly dependent on external financing. This is financing not provided by the budget, but from extra budgetary, usually external sources. Those sources have traditionally been the domestic and the foreign investors who have made contributions to Guyana's development agenda at the cost of accessing finance. The second and the more common and the lesser expensive source has been the IFIs, namely the IDB, the World Bank, Caribbean Development Bank, among others, as well as our bilateral partners, recently, particularly India and the People's Republic of China. They have provided Guyana and other developing countries with grants, and they have provided Guyana and other developing countries with loans. Loans at concessionary terms that include low interest rates. This is compared to the commercial borrowing that we occasionally resort to, but concessional terms including low interest rates, pretty long repayment periods, and generally a moratorium on the first payments. This is hallowed stuff. This is history. This is not a recent invention, initiative of the People's Progressive Party's civic administration. As I said, it is done by developing and even some developed countries all over the world. Incredibly, the former finance minister in the last PNC administration, and now the shadow minister in the APNU opposition, has decided to engage the courts in litigation to prevent Guyana accessing such loans from external financing agencies. The rationale, as Cabinet understood, was there was no authority for the PPP civic administration in the absence of a sitting parliament to engage in loan approvals and inherently in developmental works. In essence, the former finance minister and the current shadow finance minister is contending that there wasn't and there isn't provision for such. Cabinet noted that this resort to the courts flew in the face of two realities. The more obvious one is that this has been done and continues to be done by past administrations, executive governments, from the time that the history of such actions is written. So one can go back even into the PNC period and show under similar circumstances, usually when there is no parliament, during those years when the 2 years extension was provided, 1980, 1990 to 1992, Mr. Greenidge himself in the latter one was involved with the donor community on the same purpose that today he's taking the PPP civic administration to court. The second aspect that flies in the face of reality is the Constitution. There is nothing in the Constitution, Cabinet has been advised, that expressly forbids the executive government from doing precisely what it is doing, engaging and contracting goods and services. Nothing. As a matter of fact, what the Constitution does provide for is the executive government, in the face of Parliament not sitting, to have preserved its powers, including access to financing and as well as those other functions that have been provided for in the Constitution and by statutes for the executive government. The feeling is Mr. Greenidge is barking up the wrong tree. And no doubt, with the interests of the administration in pursuing development in Guyana, he may be in the courts a lot. We have recently, the president's return from India has seen the formal agreement to build the bypass road, concessionary financing being provided. We would like to see how the likes of Mr. Greenidge, the current shadow minister, engages the administration and the Guyanese public on accessing such funds for developmental projects. Snippets. Diplomatic roundup. Cabinet, at its meeting of Tuesday, March the 24th, approved the grant of its agreement for the appointment of His Excellency Mr. Nguyen Van Kien, who would be the non-resident ambassador of the Republic of Vietnam to the Republic of Guyana. Ambassador Van Kien would be resident in Brazil. President Ramatar's visit to Jamaica. President Ramatar would be joining his colleague, heads of CARICOM countries on April the 9th in a high-level encounter with the visiting U.S. President Obama. The April the 9th, 2015 encounter between the CARICOM heads and President Obama is intended to further the dialogue between both sides, CARICOM and the United States of America, with particular emphasis on trade and security. Trade and security, and dealing with it from their respective mutual interests. It is anticipated that the heads, after that one-day encounter, would collectively participate on the April 10th and 11th Summit of the Americas, scheduled to be held in Panama City. The Deepwater Harbor. The interests created by the mid-1990 establishment of a deep water shipping facility by the mining giants Reynolds and Alcoa at the mouth of the Berbice River has led to the government of Guyana concluding an MOU with a contracting firm from China for the performance of what is termed pre-feasibility studies. Expected soon in Guyana would be the technical members of the firm that would be engaged in carrying out that pre-feasibility study of the deep water harbor in the mouth of the Berbice River. Reinforcing the government resolve, of course, has been the disclosures of President Xi of the People's Republic of China of significant funding, developmental in nature, that were given at the recent CARICOM China Summit in Trinidad, and even subsequently at the BRICS, that is the Brazil, Russia, India, and South Africa conference held in our neighboring Brazil. the Chinese side has indicated would be destined for infrastructure work in the Caribbean. And it actually consists of billions of US dollars for such purposes. Election Observer Mission Update. Cabinet was advised that subsequent to the UN and the Carter electoral assessment observer missions recently here in Guyana, both the OAS and the Commonwealth have signaled their intention to dispatch the field assessment missions for the identical purposes in Guyana. Lastly, the National Insurance Scheme and the extended data entry and verification project. Subsequent to the disclosure of the 1 million plus unallocated contributions that the National Insurance Scheme is in possession of, the administration through Cabinet undertook to have those unallocated contributions provided to their rightful owners. Cabinet insisted that a public awareness component had to be a part of the reach out to the Guyanese whose contributions to the National Insurance Scheme were yet to be allocated to them. In the discussions with management and board of the National Insurance Scheme, basic elements of this outreach have been settled, and that includes local offices, particularly local offices in the areas in which the unallocated contributions have been mostly made. These local offices would produce flyers that identify the year of the unallocated contributions being received by the National Insurance Scheme, along with the employers. So we want to visit any local office and be the recipient of any of those flyers, one would clearly see that this local office, between these periods, these 2 years, the beginning and the ending, is or was in receipt of contributions that were not allocated. And it would actually provide a number, how many contributions that local office received during that period. And it would also identify who were the employers. Not to break a lance with the employer for submitting information that denied the employees, their rightful contributions, but more importantly, to allow active contributors and pensioners the opportunity to say, I have contributions that I have not been credited for, And here it is, the same year, and the same employer is on this list. I think those contributions are mine. That type of collection of information would be done at the local offices by specially designated staffers called the query officers. And after a reasonable period of time, the distribution, we feel, ought to be facilitated by accessing the information and doing the best case assignment of these contributions. The scheme itself would, on Wednesday next week, Holy Wednesday, because I guess if you have a Holy Thursday and a Good Friday, you gotta have a Holy Wednesday. So on Wednesday next week, the scheme would be having the ceremonial opening, opening of its newly constructed sports complex on Carifesta Avenue. The intention, of course, is to highlight the scheme and its contributions to Guyanese and the Guyanese working people. Ladies and gentlemen, it was a little longish opening statement, I must admit.
26 minutes.
Yes,
and
so
there are 26 of us in here, so we'll try to.
But I would urge you to accept time constraints, preventing an excursion into matters not on my opening statement, not dealt with during my opening statement. Thank you.
Sir, this is on the question of release of funding. No, I think Mr. Greenwich was preventing the finance minister from accessing whatever funds should come in. But, sir, isn't it traditional that in the run-up to elections, there is a moratorium on new projects, on accessing loans, and the like?
Adam, I have never heard about it, and even if it were so, and I must admit I've never heard about it in these 23 years that I've been around here, it would have been captured. I mean, one would consider hamstringing the government, putting you in a boxing ring with your hands tied behind the back. This is what you're actually saying. No new projects. It would mean statute, constitutional provision that precludes government from doing such. And my contention is, based on our legal advice, no such restrictions exist. The powers and the authority of the executive government, we are told, are to be exercised in an unfettered way during the period when the Appropriation Act is not in place and in line with the existing constitutional and statutory provisions.
Good afternoon, Chronicle. On the issue of the observers, any word from the governments of South Africa and India?
No, we haven't had a response from them, whether it was observer assessment or observer missions.
Yes, go ahead.
Chances Samuels, NCN. Dr. Luncheon coming back to President Obama's visit to Jamaica and subsequently to Panama. My question is, what are some of the things that Ghana is hoping to take to that meeting that are of discussion?
Which one of them? The meeting with the encounter,
yes,
or the Summit of the Americas? I'm not so certain about the Summit of the Americas. I know his participation is secured at the encounter with President Obama in Jamaica. I am yet to have confirmation about his attendance at the Summit of the Americas. But for us, trade and investments in rekindling the Guyana as a destination, we have been hurt. We have been hurt, particularly by Amila and the incredible abandonment of the Blackstone and the site global deal on Amila. We have been hurt. And we need to rekindle interests, maintain the level of interest of investors in Guyana, particularly related to its developmental agenda. Where security is concerned, I think it is fair to say our collaboration with the international community in responding to the international crime scene, those newer forms of international criminal behavior, we would again be expected to be pursuing greater and greater support, particularly in the United States of America with their Caribbean Basin Security Initiative.
Myself, Dr. Luncheon and the electoral observation update. I'm not clear. Has a response been given from the UN and Carter Center on if they will be here? Certainly. And you had said that government had written asking for extended times prior and post. Has there been a response to those?
It's difficult, and I would say maybe premature. April the 7th is indeed just around the corner. And if you recall that it was our endeavor to have observer missions in place by nomination day and for them to remain in post beyond the date of elections, beyond May the 11th. There hasn't been any specific response, and I suspect, I know that that would not be anticipated in this short period of our notification, but there hasn't been specific response from any of those who we consider to be the most likely partners, the most likely responders to our requests for observer missions. That's the UN, the Carter Center, the OAS, the Commonwealth, UNASUR. We expect others, but stronger expectations are associated with these five bodies.
Adam Harris, Prime News. Sir, the Deepwater Harbor. We have been examining a number of locations, one in the Essequibo, and now there is one in Berbice. Was any attention paid to the one in the Essequibo River for which a feasibility study had been done back in the 1970s, sir?
I couldn't answer that question with a great, but with sufficient authority. I can say that the pre-feasibility studies will be done in the mouth of the Berbice River. Like many other countries, I presume that more than one deepwater harbor would eventually grace the shores of Guyana. But sequentially, this option, the mouth of the Berbice River, is the one that is actively being pursued by the government of Guyana.
Could I follow up to the Deepwater Harbor? You had said it's a Chinese company that was undertaking the study. Do you have the name of that company? And in the MOU, is it a guarantee or a term agreement that should the feasibility study come out successful or feasible, I should say, that that company who's undertaking the study would be the company to proceed with the actual construction of the harbor?
Those concerns were thoroughly addressed at Cabinet. I have some notion of the abbreviations, but the actual name I can have provided to you shortly after this meeting. In terms of conditions, though, the MOU executed with the Chinese firm did not in any way include obligations on the government of Guyana insofar as, one, costs and financing the feasibility study, and two, using the outcome of the feasibilities, of the pre-feasibility studies. There was explicit attention in the MOU to the avoidance of such obligations by the government of Guyana.